I'm so glad to be here today with Justice Thélot, who is a writer and a curator and the author of the amazing exhibition essay which accompanies Pieces of Me. It's called Gospel for a New Century. How are you, Justice? What's going on today?
I'm doing very, very well. Another day. Very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're so glad to have you as a part of Pieces of Me and this kind of radical journey that we're going on to explore what it means to transact with intention during this new space or in this new space. And, I would just wanted to, start off by giving a little bit of background on the essay that you wrote, Gospel for a New Century. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, how this essay came together. I know it's part of a longer research effort on your part, and why you felt it was really relevant to this moment and to the show.
So I'm going to come clean. The name comes from an Eve Toomer song, who is an amazing artist. And I just thought it spoke so well to what I was trying to say. So I really like that name, Gospel for a New Century. So I've been studying online communities for almost half a decade now, and there are different forms, different platforms they can sort of grow on, and it became very interesting to me to take the moment of NFTs not just as a cultural moment, but also as one of the genesis, to use the term that we're using, of also a community, of course, a decentralized sort of rhizomatic community. Um, that specific community struck me as being different than the other ones that I had studied before. What we call communities of practice tend to be what we see online. So in some of my Facebook groups, we'll see people coming together to do something very specific, a practice such as I'm in a shoemaker group. So a bunch of people who make shoes and they share information about tools and whatnot. When I talk about Tumblr, I talk more about aesthetic community. So people who relate on what I call cultural common ground, and will sort of riff off of each other's posts in order to build this sort of uh, community with no center, because Tumblr has no group structure, but people can group around tags. And there wasn't such a big such a do for these communities as there are for this moment in time. So much polarization, and so I had the suspicion that there was something more latent and hidden under this new discourse that was happening around NFTs and about the crypto art. And I started digging, and that's how I came up with this essay, which is through the digging, thinking about the communities and doing what I call sort of cyber ethnography, and looking at, yeah, what made this community different than others, and what are the things that make it unique. And to me, it's sort of religiosity, or sort of the character of it, that I explore in the essay, that is sort of gospel like, and religious like. Yeah.
Absolutely. And as an anthropologist, the idea of doing a cyber ethnography or netnography, is really exciting to me and so relevant to this moment. I mean, as we're trying to understand what the implications are socially, economically, culturally, and in so many other different categories. And what to you, you elaborate in the essay, but what to you really defines this community as being rooted in spiritualism, and how did you find that connection?
I'm highly indebted to people like Martin Zillinger, who wrote in the artists writing about blockchain, that like huge thing that came out from further field. And uh, Martin sort of alluded to how the artists that were working around the blockchain had this fascination for its mysticism. Of course, um, it's especially as like a religious person, it's to escape the figure, Satoshi, the mysterious figure that is unknown. You have the foundational text, and then you have sort of these intra crypto wars between BSV and BTC and BS and Bitcoin Cash and Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, and those rifts are so similar to the schisms that we see in in sort of the history of the Christian religion, each with their foundational figure, like uh Vitalik for Ethereum, but there's I forget the name of the guy who is the sort of the Bitcoin Cash guy who separates himself from BTC, and there's a specific figure who represents that as well, similar to like a Martin Luther, or even to any foundational figure who sort of branches out. And the beauty of branching is also that it's like so evocative of the language of technology and of Git, and of like how we think of systems of technology sort of evolving through time, through these forks and through these changes that we do to the source code. And essentially, when I think about religion and I think about something like the Old Testament, the New Testament, as being sort of like forks to sort of like foundational text, I see them as like version control of the spirit, if you will. And so all these like metaphors and similarities were sort of like hitting me epiphany after epiphany. So this, along with a lot of the writings of the early people who were on studying this in 2015, 2016, helped me come to this conclusion, or to explore this idea of the religious and cryptocurrencies.
Absolutely. I mean, there's two things I want to talk about, but first, when you talk about religion, and particularly, spirituality within this context of thinking through, evangelism of a new financial system or of a new currency, I think of zeal or zealots, and people who are totally, for lack of a better term, have totally drunk the Kool-Aid and, kind of want to pass it around to everybody around them. And so I'm wondering, from your research and from your time studying these emerging communities, what does that zeal look like? And what does that mean to you? I mean, I've certainly seen tons of folks who are, writing in extremely evangelical ways about these new decentralized technologies. And I'm wondering if that's something that you came across, and if you could give some more color to what you've seen.
Absolutely. I mean, you have you definitely have like disciple-like figures or apostle-like figures, maybe like Pompiliano, or even a Michael Saylor, or sort of the perhaps the fallen angel of crypto, Elon Musk, if you will, with his if we're gonna like continue the conceit of this. And it really struck me as something that people fundamentally believe would bring a change to the world. And I think I in one of the paragraphs of the essay, I demonstrate that there's like a personal interest. Of course, the more people that get onto this thing, the more the value of the token rises. But also, a lot of these folks, I think, truly believe that once we remove this like antiquated financial system, that everything is decentralized, it will be sort of better for the common good. So sort of a double thing there. And there's a lot of definitely a lot of zealots, and a lot of conversions happening. And I mean, to me, it's, when you compare this to communities such as the ones I see on Tumblr or on Facebook, they tend to be more restrictive in their approach to community. So if you want to go into like, I don't know, like 2014 Tumblr and your specific niche, people are not necessarily trying to convert you to like the Lana Del Rey gospel. They're just like, this is no, these are the CDs. Go listen to them. If you like them, you can interact with the community. But there isn't such an outwardly effort to bring more people onto, the Lana army or whatever, to stand Lana or whatever. Perhaps because there is no individual vested interest, or perhaps also because people don't necessarily believe that if the entire world was, if every single individual was a barb, the world would be a better place. This is this is not a clear thing. Whereas for a lot of crypto optimists, and this idea of optimism is very important, is that this would sort of change the world completely and change the way we interact with finance and with each other, perhaps.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought up barbs, because that's exactly what came to mind when I think of zealots and online activity, and kind of the fervor of a stan group. And barbs may be the exact opposite of your classic NFT evangelical, in that they want it's a very like we want less people in the crew, not more. So it's kind of funny. But I'm really glad you brought up barbs. Um, you know, there's one section of the essay called Beyond Techno Mysticism, where you kind of talk about how this connects to a wider conversation. And I was wondering if you could explain what you mean by techno mysticism, and what in general techno mysticism kind of encompasses, as an idea or an ideology, and what kinds of ways you're seeing that expressed in these new communities wherever they may be existing, whether it's on Clubhouse or Twitter, or some of these new decentralized social platforms like crypto voxels or Decentraland.
I mean, there's I think two parts to me in this. There are aspects of cryptocurrency that appeal to ideas that are very mystical. The main one, I think I highlighted it, is immutability. This idea of permanence, I think, is one that is fundamental to a lot of religions. Sort of the God is unchanging, fundamentally. And then we have, on the other hand, this idea that like the concepts or the technologies that we're presented with, which are of course understandable because they're human made, for a lot of people are not being fully understood. Over that, I think that there are certain people who willingly obfuscate and sort of murk up the language, around these technologies, and render it arcane, because when it is arcane and people don't fully understand the technology, they walk by faith and not by sight. And this sort of perhaps helps the process of conversion in that sense. Whether it is like, and this to me is not, techno mysticism is not reserved to cryptocurrency. I think a lot of the tools that we use right now, we are alienated from the way that they work, from the way that they function. Because I think not everybody knows how to code, and even when you know how to code, you're probably using, a language that is abstracted from like very, very like fundamental sort of like code that runs a computer. Even if you're a programmer, maybe you don't fully understand the fundamentals of like a computer. And so because we're so far from the things that we're engaging with on a daily basis, for all intents and purposes, this tool it's a magic box. And these things that are happening within it, these like electromagnetic impulses that enable me to take a picture, I'm completely alienated from them. And all I can say is, Tim, Bill, and whoever else, like I'm in awe of this machine. And this, I don't think I say specifically, but the three words that I had in my when I was thinking about this was that a lot of techno mysticism comes from this idea of like Deus ex machina. It's like God outside of machine. And I think that like simply presenting these things to people who are slightly older, I think that you often have this response that this is absolutely unfathomable that this thing could potentially exist. And because we are unable to fully understand this technology, it becomes arcane and becomes sort of mystical. And another thing that sort of heightens the sentiment of mysticism is that a lot of the big tech companies, the patents are protected, and therefore we don't have full access to what is inside and how it works, and it's not open source. We can't, there's no screws on an iPhone. I can't really open it. It's very much a black box that I sort of trust to work. Similarly, cryptocurrencies, though some people have videos on YouTube trying to explain them, they have a certain level of complexity to them that comes closer to this idea of like this is mystical. I don't fully understand it. It was created by a person that I do not know, that has disappeared for all intents and purposes. And it has a, yes, mysticality to it. Essentially because also, and this also applies to the stock market, but the motions and the prices also seem to be at the whim of some unknown force which we could not control or seize or comprehend. We understand that it's the quote unquote market, but it's so abstracted that what is the market but, you know, this like invisible force that us feeble humans, you know, we are unable to comprehend.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to continue connecting to how ethnography fits into this. One thing that I've always been really fascinated by is ethnographies of tech workers and of coders, because as you said, we're working with code at such an abstract level and across so many different departments and people and pieces that for instance, no single person at Google, even behind the curtain, could ever tell you how the search algorithm runs beginning to end. That's kind of abstract knowledge that in some ways has become autonomous. And I think that in terms of faith and kind of these forces that we're just subject to, I mean, everyone's faith was somewhat tested this month as we experienced a huge dip in prices, and kind of the language that people were using on Twitter was, like people who had almost lost faith or were trying to evangelize others to keep the faith despite disaster. And that felt kind of insane to me, and just really fascinating. And just, this is not necessarily related, but just connected to what you said. I mean, most of the tech revolutions that have happened are, as you said, similar to cryptocurrency, have been led by these kind of mystical figures: Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, these kind of men who are elevated to these unbelievable, almost demigod statuses. And I'm wondering, in any religion, I mean, throughout the course of history, religion has always been tied to power, and also to money, which is also tied to power. And of course, I think that relationship is even more explicit in this marketplace, or in kind of the world of decentralized technologies, or DeFi. And so, in the essay text, there's a fabulous kind of image where it's a Venn diagram that shows culture and spirituality and finance and power kind of all converging together in these ideas. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the relationship between, maybe not the relationship between, but how spirituality and finance kind of confront one another or overlap in this marketplace, and how does that dynamic or relationship work?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's very related to this idea that like the complex financial instruments that run our world, in spite of being like, people attempt to explain them, like I think The Big Short did a good example of that, are still fundamentally sort of inscrutable. And the people who work, as you mentioned, in these industries, because you are a worker, even if you're like a high paid finance person, you're a worker in a little block and you're only looking at a specific piece of the financial market. This like piecework, the work is segmented and pieced for each of the workers. Nobody has a full overview, and so this, as you mentioned, these autonomous almost forces, this egregore, if you will, of like financial instruments, forces working together, create a certain spirituality around financial instruments. We choose to believe in them because some might say we don't have any other choice. But I mean, some people do the whole like big refusal thing, the thorough route, and they go out and but there is something extremely sort of spiritual, in my opinion, in this idea that like the wills of people abstracted to the level of numbers on a line sort of direct the way the world goes. uh, and I I'm constantly in awe of like how this line has such a large impact on us, and it's looking at the stock market is a numinous experience. It is a fear-inducing sort of religious experience. And Rudolf Otto, who wrote about sort of like the birth of religions and communities, uses this term, and I think it's very much what I feel in the modern world. The stock market is 100% numinous. And one thing that's interesting about faith, you mentioned this, we just had the big crash last week or 2 weeks ago. Faith has to be tested, and that's like that is one of the fundamental parts of it. And some of the images that I show, and this is why early Christian art or sort of paleo Christian art is super interesting to me, is that what they depict usually are these moments where faith is tested. I put the image of the three young boys from the book of Daniel who go into the furnace by at the order of Nebuchadnezzar, who was king of Babylon at the time, and he sort of sentences them to be burned, and their faith is tested, and they stay there, and an angel comes and saves them. But yeah, people are, Jesus in the desert, 40 days in a desert of being tested by the devil. Joseph, 7 years of I'm forgetting the word in English, but 7 years of like poor conditions for the Hebrew people. And similarly, even Moses has this episode where he's like striking on a rock, asking for the water to come out as they're walking through the desert, and he strikes a second time in doubt of God. And so it is only through these episodes, and this is something we see also in like organizational behavior in communities. A good example for this is I was studying the Simpsons shitposting group, and one of the things that sort of cemented the group and created a bond was that the group was sold, which is something that can happen on Facebook, and people started fighting back in this sort of traumatic event in the community. As people fought back, the group became more tightly knit, and then when they sort of got the control of the group back, they were closer than ever before, right? And an interesting sort of parallel in the crypto world was in Friends with Benefits, which is the group from Trevor McFreddy's. There was a similar hack where people must have lost like sort of 90% of the value of the token in this, in a few minutes. And through these traumatic events, through these moments when your faith is tested, the people who remain in the group are like sort of cemented to it, and that sort of keeps the religion going in a way, because you have to obey the cognitive dissonance of being in these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's almost like, in a way too, it's almost like trauma bonding, in some way.
Absolutely.
I know, in Friends with Benefits, when Benefits 1.0 crashed, that was such a traumatic experience for the whole community, and they bounced back better than ever with, Friends with Benefits too. There's one more point in the essay that I want to touch on that I found really interesting. Was there was a section where you talk about the relationship between religion and ritual, and you specifically mentioned kind of the elegiac function of different ritual acts. And I'm wondering, what do those kinds of rituals look like in the crypto world, and what sort of, I guess, purpose might those acts serve in terms of building community or having some other kind of symbolic or representative function?
Mm-hmm. And this is something that I'm very interesting in. Sort of, I'm actively discovering them because this is happening in real time. I think I mentioned the sale in this essay, but now there's another ritual that I can think of, which is the Genesis piece. To me is also like a baptism in the world of crypto art. In a way, it's like this is the first time you're minting, and people sort of surround you, be like, oh, this is it. There's an event around that. So yeah, I definitely see ritual as becoming an increasingly important part of this new community. And of course, at the time, a lot of the rituals were sort of around dirges, around funerals for early Christian communities. Um, and I think that crypto communities have done something similar. It's not quite, it's sort of perhaps the reversal of a funeral, but they've sort of centered around this idea of the sale as being one of the most wonderful acts that can happen for a person who chooses to mint and who chooses to present an NFT. And that act, in a way, when you consider that the utter disbelief of sort of your average person, if you listen to CNBC when they NFT sort of people are like, I don't understand this. And the act of the sale is miraculous. And you have all these heathens, all these non-believers who were like, how can this possibly happen? You know, how can Lazarus rise from the dead? How can Beeple be sold for 69 million? These are like similar things where people are in miracle shock. They cannot believe that this thing has happened. And this is why rituals, I think, will continue to become an important part. And each sale, until perhaps we reach critical mass adoption, will be cherished because they will prove that this can sort of work, or that there's a power to this thing that we are doing and that we're actively engaging in. But so yeah, the sale, the Genesis piece, and then I think there will be more as communities sort of fork out, branch out, do their own things. Perhaps even the burning might become a new ritual. I've seen, I think, PAC do that, where they burn a few of their NFTs, and so that might become a thing that people do as well.
Yeah.
Creation, transaction, and destruction.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to mention burning as one ritual. I think maybe the shill post is another one.
Yeah.
Where people kind of come together and share their work in a way that feels almost sermon-like.
Well, the shill post, are you something that I think the Church of the Latter Days of Christ do, the Mormons, that you have to spend your two of your first years sort of being a missionary, going around with your, you see them in the subway maybe sometimes, or the shilling, or the act of sort of spreading the news, is essential to that specific group of Christians. But yeah, there's all these things that I think, once I think I do more research, or people do more research, we'll start seeing these patterns of behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I only, I think about, the power of Christianity, and how, for instance, like the Roman Empire, kind of coming from, the Catholic Church really shaped the world, and kind of, or the Western world at least. And, similarly, I wonder how this new crypto religion is going to shape the world, if it will have that kind of far-reaching and empirical kind of function, and where that leaves us, which sort of brings me to my last question for you, which is, in this new religion, where does the artist fit in, and what is their role? Because obviously we have kind of the demigod deity figures, we have the apostles, we have the disciples, and our artists, how do they fit into the story, and what kind of piece in this new community is really here for them?
That's an excellent question. So I think that my outlook for this is a slightly more pessimistic. As I mentioned in the essay, I think that the sort of the larger figures who hold the capital will deploy capital towards artists to make their vision of this religion come true. And so because of that, I think that that's the same reason why I think we built all these gigantic churches in specific styles, whether it be Gothic or whatever. And these were the wills of these people who had a lot of wealth, had a lot of capital, had a lot of land. And similarly, the whales in the crypto space will push forth their own agenda, both sort of culturally and aesthetically, and will seek to have that sort of spread out throughout the community. For instance, I think that Beeple works in a specific aesthetic code, and that it appealed to Metacoven for perhaps the critique of capitalism or of established systems, and it sort of fits within the ideology or sort of future that a lot of the crypto optimists seek to bring to fruition. And so option number one to me is that the artists become, in the early days, the sort of emissaries of these whales. Now, second option is the forks, which I think are very interesting, which we might see, and we're already seeing, I think, with Hick at Nunk and Tezos and artists, because this is an open source system. So this is one thing that's I think fundamentally different, is that this, in a way, we can, anybody can create a new cryptocurrency, and anybody can create a new community or new token. I think this allows artists, in a way, to, even through DAOs, even through their own organizations, to create their guilds, or if, not a sect perhaps, but an order, I think is what I call in a church. And with these orders, I think, and this is my role as a curator, I think this is what you and Kalani have done an amazing job at, is providing a space for artists to work, share, confront, subvert, and not necessarily sort of just be emissaries for the whales, but work in their own spaces and do what they want, and have this conversation about their faith, about their currency, about their tokens, about their technology, for or against, for sure, but have that space and that order. And I think that that is going to be the role of both the artists, to adopt these technologies, to criticize them, to adopt, subvert, amend, change them, make their own thing from it. And I'm very hopeful, because of places like Transfer Gallery, because of the conversation I'm seeing online, that both of these things are going to happen simultaneously. And that's okay, because it's decentralized, and essentially it's only a matter of ensuring that all voices are heard in this process, and that sort of one doesn't sort of overshadow the other. But yeah, the role of the artist is the role of the sort of sectarian religious person who is exploring faith as a whole and asking questions, sort of like the philosopher of faith, in a way.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to be so fascinated to see how this, continues to keep developing, and whether we see new cults and churches and sects and orders emerge over the next few years. And, I hope that you'll keep us abreast of your research, and your findings as you do so. And I'll, of course, be, keeping my eye out too. Thank you so much, Justice, for your amazing essay, Gospel for a New Century. Please head to piecesofme.online to read it, and get in touch with us, and get in touch with Justice if you want to talk about it, or if you have any ideas that you'd like to share. Thank you so much, Justice, for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Rich, for having me. This was wonderful, and go see Pieces of Me if you haven't yet.
Yeah, you're watching NFTV from Pieces of Me and Transfer Gallery. Till next time.